This is a reading from Oahspe. This is the introduction. It starts with a quote from Walter DeVoe, and it says, "How could I have believed anything less of the kind Father of life? His wise omnipotence could only do what was best and tenderest from the very constitution of his nature of divine love. How could I doubt in God what I, in my little wisdom, should have planned to meet human needs?" Then it proceeds with this. The title of the book, Oahspe, means literally sky, earth, and spirit. O for sky, Ah for earth, and Spe for spirit. The book is a product of automatic writing, which occurred through the hands of a medium, Dr. John B. Newbrough, over the course of 1 year, in 1881, in New York City. The book stated that it was written by an overshadowing of angelic beings who are not a separate order in creation, but are actually our elder brothers and sisters, once mortals like us, but now high raised in wisdom through countless years of growth and experience. They stated that Oahspe is not a perfect book, nor is it the alpha and omega of knowledge. Rather, it is like a traveler's guide to greater spiritual growth and understanding. Its purpose is to give us an insight, while yet in mortality, of what the world of spirit is really like, and what the general history of the world has been. As a result, it gives us greater clarity regarding our true purpose and destiny as the immortal, eventually angelic souls that we are. New students of Oahspe may ask, why would such a book be written at all? Why in 1881 and not some other year? Why through an unknown personality like John Newbrough and not through someone more famous? Why in so questionable a form as automatic writing, rather than appearing in a burst of light, already completed on a tablet of gold and exhibited for all to see? First of all, Oahspe states that we have entered a new era, one in which we will eventually see the maturity of humanity. It explains that this is part of the natural evolution of any inhabited planet. Oahspe indicates that inhabited planets are a frequent occurrence throughout our vast universe. We entered this new era, not long before this book was written, and efforts at enlightenment, such as Oahspe, are standard operating procedures at those times. Revelations are divinely inspired in more than one form, in more than one place, in varying shapes and styles, so that the greatest number of people can be reached according to their varied abilities to accept and understand. These inspirational efforts have been and will continue to be applied to the full spectrum of knowledge, from the purely spiritual, like Oahspe, to inspired hard science, like E equals mc squared. The eventual result will be a mature balance between both spiritual and material knowledge throughout all of humanity, but evolving with an era extending thousands of years, a blink of an eye to those who are beyond mortality. The transmission of Oahspe by automatic writing should not be a surprise. Spirit communion is normal, natural, and not as difficult as some people are led to believe. It actually occurs more frequently than most people consciously realize, being typically permitted as vague imaginings, intuitive expressions, or even fortuitous premonitions. It is only labeled as evil by those who lack understanding, or by those who believe that they can only maintain their misguided agenda by suppressing honest investigation and keeping us ignorant of the true state of affairs. Knowing their agenda won't stand up to the logic and intelligent inquiry. They have learned that inducing fear can serve their interest. Fear and ignorance have long been established as interrelated in nature. It is a sobering realization for the duplicitous that most people, if allowed the unfettered freedom to think for themselves, will eventually arrive at a place closer to the truth. Early in this new era, many people with mediumistic abilities were raised, guided, and groomed by the angels who have us in their care. It just happens that John Newbrough was the right person in the right place at the right time. The one who had the best ability and development at the time the angelic overshadowing was ready to carry out this effort in education. Automatic writing was apparently the most efficient way to transmit the information required at the place and time. In this case, the writing was accomplished through the means of a typewriter, but the principle remains the same. Through natural development and training, an individual becomes able to enter a passive, meditative state that allows an intelligence other than one's own to take control of the body's mechanical functions temporarily and right under that control. This is a form of mediumship that has been used countless of times throughout history, whether by type, pencil, brush, or by hand directly on tablets of sand. Dr. John Newbrough explained in his own words how Oahspe was written in a letter he sent to a magazine, The Banner of Light, in Boston, reprinted at the end of the introduction. Death, as we call it, is not the end of our existence, but rather the beginning of the real life for which we were created. As indestructible spiritual beings, we are all immortal souls, destined for growth far above and beyond the limited experiences we have while residing for a brief time on earth. On first crossing the veil between mortality and the life and spirit, our friends and relatives who have just passed are not as far away as some of us imagine, for the transformation of death is more change in dimension than distance. Consequently, one does not have to wait long for loving assistance from friends and family when first passing into spirit life. The proximity is what also allows communication between our realm and theirs to occur when appropriate preparations are provided. This is because all of us, one spirit or mortal, dwell in the same sea of mind, the all-mind, and it is through that same all-pervading medium that we are all forever inextricably linked together in thought. The only catch is that the sudden transformation at death does not instill in us any sudden injection of wisdom, a relative quality that grows only by ongoing experience through the eons before us. At first we are, at best, not very different than we were in mortality. We leave this plane with very much the same intelligence and understanding we had as mortals. For that reason, communications from the realms of spirit are not necessarily true or accurate. We should not accept information as unconditionally true just because it came from the spirit plane, any more than we accept information we receive now just because we read it in the newspapers. We should always subject information we receive to the test of our own inspired intelligence and reason, or else we are no better than puppets or automatons. Oahspe does purport, however, to have been written by angels who are far beyond us in life experience. Because of their long sojourn in the realm of spirits, which is our true destiny as well, they are able to give us insights that are much more all-encompassing in scope and comprehension that could be ascertained from anyone with limited experience. One must also understand that Dr. Newbrough was not perfect. He was neither a prophet nor a saint. He was merely a well-developed medium who became the most convenient and suitable tool in the hands of the angelic overshadowing when they were ready to accomplish this task of transmitting Oahspe. The value is in the content of the book, and not in who wrote it. If it had fallen from the sky in a flash of light, its value as a source of information would not have been improved by that event if the message it contained had been lacking in relevance or truth. There have been other books written under inspiration, both before and after Oahspe was published. Many of those books included similar information, and one should expect this to occur. Oahspe is truly unique, however, in its scope and comprehensive overview of the subject. Several years after the publishing of Oahspe, Dr. Newbrough founded a utopian community for raising orphan children, based on the model given in the Book of Shalom, which appears near the end of Oahspe. Unfortunately, this ambitious project was an example of what an incredible degree of willpower and an incredible amount of money could accomplish when the quality of people needed to make such an undertaking a success was sadly lacking. The Book of Shalom was meant to be a parable, an allegory, a lesson in the form of a story, used to illustrate what the society of the future will be like when humanity was progressed to a point in this new era where it will be able to live in a higher way. This transformation will not be sudden, nor will it occur through the imposition of a proverbial utopia. Rather, the implication is that this societal shift will first develop from a new social structure that functions in parallel with the old, but which will gradually displace the old by attrition, not revolution. This will be a world in which society governed by rigid laws and regulations, self-serving majorities, and special interests will be gradually supplanted by an alternate society governed by sincere selflessness and compassion, with the commonly held reverence for our Creator, by conviction and choice, not force. The culmination will be a society that the universe sadly recognizes and nurtures that of God in everyone, and intuitively structures its community and interpersonal relationships accordingly. As different as it may be to comprehend, all wars and terrorism will have ceased. Unfortunately, as a society, we are not much closer to that state of mind now than we were more than a century ago, when Dr. Newbrough's Shalom was attempted. But that does not mean that such a harmonious, selfless order of society will never come to pass. And according to Oahspe, just the first segment, arc, of this era, called Cosmin, spans approximately 3,000 years. Dr. Newbrough, however, embraced the idea of this possibility with a passion, and after several false starts and many difficulties, he managed to set the stage for his experiment near La Cruz, New Mexico, in 1884. An undertaking of such magnitude at the same time would not have been easy under the best circumstances, but Dr. Newbrough made the project unnecessarily complicated and burdensome by his mistaken conviction to interpret the Book of Shalom literally in going to the place where the world's people would not live to make it a place of peace and beauty. It is easy to say in retrospect that the project was driven more by blind idealism than by common sense, but the fact remains that the effort was a sad failure and a painful lesson in the realities of human nature in its present undeveloped state. For a factual, reasonably unbiased, and scholarly account of this experiment, we recommend reading Shalom, Utopia on the Rio Grande, 1881 through 1907, by Lee Priestley, 1998, El Paso, Texas, Texas Western Press, or viewing the documentary Utopia on the Rio Grande by Robin Riley, made in 2010. John B. Newbrough was born on June 5, 1828, in Mohicanville, Ohio, near Worcester. Though he was raised on a farm by a family with limited means, he eventually was able to attend Cincinnati Medical College and established himself as a practicing physician. During his schooling, however, he gained experience in dentistry, and after finding life as a physician too disturbing for his sensitive nature, he turned his efforts to dentistry instead. Following the completion of his education, he joined the 1849 gold rush to California, where he was successful at accumulating a small fortune. He later compounded that fortune in the gold fields of Australia. He then moved on to world travel, eventual marriage, and by about 1859, he established residency in New York City. There he pursued his practice in dentistry for the next 25 years. He became one of the prominent dentists of New York City, and he was innovative enough to develop a revolutionary and inexpensive composition for dental plates that made the appliances more accessible to the poor. Throughout his life, Dr. Newbrough displayed a nature mediumistic ability of high caliber. He often received spirit communications that made him aware that there is more to the world around us than what is apparent to our normally limited senses. and that there is much more meaning and purpose to our lives than what we can deduce from our experience during our limited time on the mortal plane. He became convinced that the information received from his friends and relatives who had crossed the veil was of limited value, and that if he wanted to receive enlightened information from more highly developed sources, he needed to prepare himself in ways that would make himself more amenable to their enlightened presence. Perhaps this notion was impressed upon him by those in spirit who were already grooming him as a potential candidate for the imminent transmission of Oahspe. Whether or not the idea was inspired, he did convert to a strict vegetarian lifestyle, and he followed a prayerful discipline to purify both mind and body. During this time, he continued to be exercised for mediumistic development by an overshadowing that asked him countless questions no mortal could answer intelligently, but perhaps directed his mind into a more spiritually compatible point of reference. When his overshadowing decided that the time had come, that conditions were finally suitable, and that Dr. Newbrough was to be the vehicle of choice to be used, he suddenly began to receive Oahspe. He was told to purchase a typewriter and to sit for half an hour before dawn daily, at which time the angelic overshadowing typed the manuscript through his hands. He was instructed to put all the typed pages inside until the work was completed. Then, after working for 1 year, he was told to read and publish the text. It would be logical to assume that the angelic overshadowing who cultivated Dr. Newbrough's development for the specific task of transmitting Oahspe would also develop other mediums for the same purpose at the same time. It would seem unnecessarily risky to place all your hopes for so important a task upon one individual. By nurturing several mediums at the same time, it would be easier to determine who had developed the qualities most suited for their purpose. There is ample evidence to suggest that this may well have been their methodology, since several highly developed mediums living at the time also received high-quality communications, some of which included information similar to aspects of the messages Dr. Newbrough received. We believe these other writings support and confirm the value of Oahspe and suggest that other individuals were being cultivated simultaneously for the same possible purpose. Even Oahspe states that other people in other places would be inspired similarly and that they would be brought together. Although it seems that other avenues may have been explored, it is evidence that Dr. Newbrough displayed the right degree of development at the right time, and consequently the task of producing Oahspe was placed in his hands. It is worth reiterating that this was not done because he was a high-raised prophet or saint, but because he was simply a very talented and highly developed medium in the right place at the opportune moment. Oahspe was not his book. This is very reason to believe that the information it offered was as much news to him as it was to other people who read it, and he was as much impressed by his messages as anyone else. It was for this reason that he decided to undertake the building of his community called Shalom, taken from the parable describing the society of the future of Oahspe's Book of Shalom. He was told by the angelic overshadowing administering the Oahspe project that the world at the time had not yet reached a level of development amenable to the ideals of Shalom. But if he had wanted to try to build such a community, it was certainly his choice, and he was free to do so. Perhaps Dr. Newbrough was overconfident. Perhaps his enthusiasm for Oahspe clouded his judgment. It does seem, however, that he did attempt to follow the example of the book Shalom too literally. Within several short years, April 23, 1891, Dr. Newbrough died from pneumonia, secondary to influenza. Not long after his death, Dr. Newbrough's experimental community failed. His most loyal co-worker, Andrew Howland, tried to carry on, but eventually surrendered to grim reality and closed Shalom in 1907. The original manuscript of Oahspe, as well as the oil portraits of the prophets Newbrough painted automatically during his early years at Shalom, no longer exist. One story relates that these items had been stored in the basement of a house in El Paso, Texas. A mudslide from a severe storm washed into the house, completely destroying the manuscript and paintings. Another story, but probably closer to the truth, relates to Newbrough's daughter, Justine, who had possession of these items, but who was known to harbor bitter feelings about her Shalom experience, impulsively destroyed them one day in a backyard bonfire to dispose of them. Either way, what is obvious is that no special value had been placed on these items by anyone involved, or else greater care would have been taken to preserve them. Perhaps they were considered superfluous, since the manuscripts and portals had already been published. Perhaps the angelic overshadowing, still overseeing ongoing developments, actually wanted these remaining objects destroyed. Clearly, the act decisively eliminated any possibility that anyone might eventually possess these items as coveted relics and assume unwarranted authority or legitimacy as sole interpreter of the text, an idea antithetical to the teachings of Oahspe. The Rio Grande Historical Collections, under the auspices of New Mexico State University at La Cruz, has become a valuable source for historical information relating to Shalom. Oahspe is easily the most unique book in the English language. Its objective is formidable, for it states that within its pages it has herein made known the plan of the Creator's delightful creations for the resurrection of the peoples of the earth. Oahspe also states that the book's purpose is to teach mortals how to attain to hear the Creator's voice and to see his heavens in full consciousness while still living on the earth, and to know of a truth the place and condition awaiting them after death. As awe-inspiring as the possibility of such a revelation may be, Oahspe reminds us that we should not worship this book, for it states, "Non-infallible, immaculate is this book, Oahspe." We should therefore not allow ourselves to fall into the trap of making it into an inflexible rule book to be quoted chapter and verse, which would negate our fundamental obligation to think, to reason, and to grow. Rather, we should use this volume as a guide to further our own spiritual understanding and as a source for basic fundamental principles that can be used to shape and mold our future development. We are confident that there is enough substance within its pages to provide for our growth throughout our mortal lives and well beyond that as well. The text infers that the host of a high-raised angelic being who caused Oahspe to be written and published were commissioned specifically for that purpose by those above them who administer the higher heavens. Oahspe states that Earth is just one of countless planets in a universe inhabited by human beings. It also states that all planets follow a similar pattern of development, though the details differ substantially. Wherever humanity does arise, it eventually reaches a stage of development called cosmon, when spiritual and corporeal knowledge is ready to culminate into a state of natural maturity and balance. When this level of maturity is soon to begin evolving near the commencement of this era, the angelic hosts provide information that will complement this evolutionary process for the benefit of those individuals who have progressed enough to appreciate the transformative concepts offered. Their efforts to assist our coming of age take many forms, but one aspect includes clearing the air of falsehoods, half-truths, misinformations about who we really are, where we came from, and where we are going. To accomplish this task, Oahspe begins with a history of our planet for the past 24,000 years and more, tracing events that occurred not only on Earth but in the heavens surrounding the Earth during that same period of time. Oahspe states that corporeal events are much more influenced by events in the spirit world than the other way around. This is due in part to the fact that those who have crossed into the world of spirit are by nature still able to perceive and influence the corporeal plane, while those who are still in corporeality are much less able to even perceive conditions in the spiritual dimensions of existence, let alone influence it. Thus the saying, as above, so below. Oahspe symbolically highlights the principle by physically arranging the text so that the history of the spirit plane is superimposed above the history of the corporeal plane during the same time cycle. For example, the Book of Aph appears above the Lord's first book, covering heavenly and earth history over the same time period. The Book of Aph is read first, followed by the Lord's first book. Heavenly history is then picked up again by jumping ahead on the Book of Su, and so on. Oahspe states that the Creator, and there is but one, regardless of the name you wish to use, made humanity to be co-creators and helpmates in an ever-unfolding universe. Each and every one of us is a new and pristine creation at the moment of conception. All of us are given a spark of the ever-present at that moment that makes us very much a part of our Creator, who is the essence of all life and all that is, was, or ever shall be. Though our awareness of life in spirit is clouded by the influence of our physical bodies and our necessity to deal with physical environment through limited physical senses, we are actually spiritual beings, here and now. This means that we are already residing in the dimension of spirit, thought, and mind, even though we are melded for the moment with the physical frame in the corporeal dimension of existence. Just as a fetus resides in a womb, which is the ideal environment in which to grow until it is strong enough to subsist on its own, our spirit is at first housed in a corporeal body until it is strong enough to subsist on its own in the eternal world of spirit. Consequently, the reality is that the spiritual beings that are the real us enter the spirit world at death as easily as standing up from the chair, because the essence of our beings already reside in the dimension of spirit, thought, and mind, even though that reality is not apparent to us. In other words, at the moment of death, we do not go anywhere, because we are already there. We do not leave our physical body. Our physical body leaves us, like a discarded shroud that is no longer of any use. We begin where we left off, unchanged, except for the renewed perfection of our spiritual bodies, and with the same consciousness as before. Until then, it is only the temporary dullness of our spiritual senses caused by the influence of our physical shells that belies that reality. All of us, regardless of who we are, or how miserably we may have failed in life, are actually future angels in embryonic form, destined for an eternal life that progresses through endless realms of growth and experience. Even those unfortunates who die in infancy are never lost. Each of us is already an immortal soul from the moment of conception, the moment when the Creator's presence brings into being a new, eternally enduring, self-conscious soul. Each infant is nurtured in spirit, growing through childhood into mature adulthood, just as it would have had it remained in the mortal realm on earth. Even though it lost the experience of corporeality in that process, its development remains happy, strong, and wholesome. Nevertheless, a fact that can be a comfort to mothers who grieve. Our growth and experience, however, starts here on earth, and like all true progress, it is never an easy path nor attained without a struggle. The history handed down in the text of Oahspe clearly illustrates this point and shows that earthly events are not as much random products of chance as they sometimes appear to be to us. Our development and growth have been monitored and guided by our Creator and by the Creator's high-raised angels, in whose charge the ever-present has placed our care. Oahspe concludes with several doctrinal books that give us guidelines that we may choose to live by to further our own progression. It finally gives a glimpse of our future in the Book of Shalom, which, using a parable, describes what the society of the future would be like through the actual details of how it arises and how it may develop dependent on circumstances that may vary substantially from place to place. If you are able to comprehend Oahspe's mind-expanding perspective on the universe that we inhabit both now and in an eternal future. If you are able to free your mind of the shackles of the limited teachings of the past, it will bring you to a state of understanding that will change your life. You will never see the earth, its people, and the stars above your head in the same way ever again. The Banner of Light letter. The following is a text, selectively abridged, of the letter written by John B. Newbrough to a publication called The Banner of Light, to explain in his own words how Oahspe was received. Since Dr. Newbrough is describing events as he perceived them, it is understandable that he should use phrases like, "I was not satisfied," or "I was craving," or "I took it into my head." These personal references could lead one to think that somehow Dr. Newbrough initiated the idea and facilitated the mechanism necessary to produce a volume like Oahspe, or that somehow his actions attracted the angelic overshadowing to him, as a flame would attract moths. This, of course, could be no further from the truth. The reality was that the planning process for the production of Oahspe was in effect long before Dr. Newbrough was even born, and that his role had been completely a reflection of the will and controlling influences of the angelic overshadowing that chose to use his natural talents to their advantage at a critical moment in time. While Dr. Newbrough's involvement in the process is appreciated, it was purely serendipitous. Okay. Now here is the letter to the Banner of Light. And it goes, "Dear Sir, Oahspe was mechanically written through my hands by some other intelligence than my own. Many spiritualists are acquainted with this automatic movement of the hands, independent of one's own volition. There are thousands and thousands of persons who have this quality. It can also be educated, or rather the susceptibility to external powers can be increased. In my own case, I discovered many years ago, when sitting in circles to obtain spiritual manifestations, that my hands could not lie on the table without flying off into these tantrums. Often they would write messages left or right, backward or forwards, nor could I control them in any other way than by withdrawing from the table. Sometimes the power thus baffled would attack my tongue, or my eyes, or my ears, and I talked and I saw and I heard differently from my normal state. Then I went to work in earnest to investigate spiritualism, and I investigated over 200 mediums, traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles for this purpose. Often I took them to my own house and experimented with them to my heart's content. I found that nearly all of them were subject to this involuntary movement of the hands, or to entrancement. They told me it was angels controlling them. In course of time, about 10 or 15 years, I began to believe in spiritualism. But I was not satisfied with the communications. I was craving for the light of heaven. I did not desire communications from friends or relatives, or information about earthly things. I wished to learn something about the spirit world, what the angels did, how they traveled, and the general plan for the universe. So after a while, I took it into my head that wise and exalted angels would commune better with us if we purified ourselves physically and spiritually. Then I gave up eating flesh and fish, milk and butter, and took to rising before day, bathing twice a day, and occupying a small room alone, where I sat every morning half an hour before sunrise, recounting daily to my Creator my shortcomings, and governing myself in thought and deed. In 6 years' training, I reduced myself from 250 pounds down to 180. My rheumatism was all gone, and I had no more headache. I became limber and sprightly. A new lease of life came to me. Then a new condition of control came upon my hands. Instead of angels holding my hands as formerly, they held their hands over my head, and they were clothed with sufficient materiality for me to see them. And a light fell upon my hand as they lay on the table. In the meantime, I had attained to hear audible angel voices near me. I was directed to get a typewriter, which writes by keys, like a piano. This I did, and I applied myself industriously to learn it, but with only indifferent success, For 2 years more, the angels propounded to me questions relative to heaven and earth, which no mortal could answer very intelligently. I always look back on these 2 years as an enigma. Perhaps it was to show me that man is but an ignoramus at best. Perhaps I was awaiting for constitutional growth to be good. Well, one morning the light struck both my hands and on the back, and they went for the typewriter, for some 15 minutes, very vigorously. I was told not to read what was printed, and I had worked myself into such a religious fear of losing this new power that I obeyed reverently. The next morning, also before sunrise, the same power came and wrote, or printed rather, again. Again I laid the matter away very religiously, saying little about it to anybody. One morning I seemed accidental to me, looked out the window and beheld the line of light that rested on my hands extending heavenward, like a telegraph wire towards the sky. Over my head were 3 pairs of hands, fully materialized. Behind me stood another angel with her hands on my shoulders. My looking did not disturb the scene. My hands kept right on, printing. For 50 weeks this continued every morning, half an hour or so before sunrise. Then it ceased, and I was told to read and publish the book Oahspe. The peculiar drawings in Oahspe were made with pencil in the same way. A few of the drawings I was told to copy from other books, such as Saturn, the Egyptian ceremonies, etc. Now, during all the while, I have published my vocation, dentistry. Nor has this mattered, nor my diet, vegetables, fruit, and farinaceous food, detracted any from my health or strength, although I have continued this discipline for upwards of 10 or more years. I am firmly convinced that there are numberless persons who might attain to marvelous development if they would thus train themselves. A strict integrity to one's highest light is essential to development. Self-abnegation and purity could be the motto and discipline of everyone capable of angel communion. Yours truly, J.B. Newbrough.